I don't remember what's in here, except I think I know what's the last one. So we're
Mhm.
going to start with a Malt Barn Invergordon 1972. Another
Yeah,
49. Well, actually, no, the other one was only 48, right? Is this the
yeah.
oldest?
This is the oldest whiskey in the calendar.
There you go.
So this is a more traditional approach to an old grain where I believe it was either ex-bourbon or refill, not sherry like the Carsbridge 48-year-old that we had.
Mhm. Yeah, the Malt Barn guys are not really in the finishing game. I think it's they just bottle the cask as is. My understanding is they get most of their casks through the whiskey agency. So uh,
Mhm.
Invergordon's an interesting distillery. If you were to drive by it, it's on the way from Inverness to Tain, where Glenmorangie is,
Yep.
not far
Not
from
too far
Delmore.
from Delmore. Yep.
Yeah, if you were to drive by it, you'd think you were driving past an oil refinery because that's what it
Mhm.
looks like. It's a big industrial facility. Uh, so Evan, tell us about this one.
Yeah, I think it actually it went through iterations where it was one of the few things it wasn't was an oil refinery at one point because the buildings were already there, and it's named after the town of Invergordon, which is named after the laird that had the property at the time, I believe, whose last name was Gordon, and he essentially purpose-built a township in the area. And when it was like a steel plant or something that, or no, a naval yard, sorry, that operated during World War I all the way up till 1956 or so,
Hmm.
and then was shut down by the British Navy. And the township or the town of Invergordon didn't really have a whole lot employment wise outside of that. So they weren't sure what to do. And then the Invergordon Distilling Company was sort of came into the fruition, purchased the property and built the distillery there. So it's
Mhm.
been around since the late 1950s, early 60s. It's owned by White and Mackay or White and Mackay, owners of Delmore, and is used in a lot of the White and Mackay blends. Uh, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, it's probably the Shackleton uses it, but of course it wouldn't because Shackleton is a blended malt, not a blended Scotch.
And
But
predated Invergordon Distillery.
yeah, and one of the other cool things that we haven't seen on this side of the pond yet is, from the looks of it, they actually have official bottlings of Invergordon now, of
Really?
single grain whiskey that they've been releasing. They've got a 10, a 14, and an 18-year-old or something, which is pretty cool.
I didn't know that. That's quite interesting. Well, they did just rebrand Cairn in the not too distant past. So yeah, I'm excited to see one of those. Hopefully, they do a better job than Hague Club. Um, but that's a different matter. We won't
Well,
take
different
measure right
company,
off
so
the top.
fingers crossed for sure.
Well, it's like icing sugar on crepes with like a touch of lemon juice. It's decadent, creamy, floral. Um,
Mhm.
there's a bit of a toastiness to the oak, but not over the top. Um, sort of like a coconut icing sugar as well.
Yeah, a little bit of a rum-like note on the nose there, which I think some grains tend to get. Definitely sort of colors more inside the lines versus the Carsbridge for what you would expect from an older grain whiskey.
Oh, that's a lovely old grain. Wow.
Mhm.
Loads of fruit, decadent, creamy, more of those bakery pastry tones, some nice citrus. And man, that's starting to go tropical on the finish.
Yeah, I've got these bottlings actually look neat. I'll bring up the screen with the official bottlings just so you guys can take a look because yeah, I do kind of I don't know what the pricing would be, but I hope we see these in Canada at some point.
What did they bottle them at?
Let's see. 43
Yeah,
would have been
crazy.
nice if it was 46, but it's not 40, so got to give them that.
Well, and interesting,
46 on the 21, so that's good.
Compass Box has discontinued their hedonism. So
Hmm.
maybe we'll see more grains coming direct from guys like that.
Yeah, it'd be neat. Yeah, it's nice to see a grain distillery get a bit more of a showcase. The only one that really gets a bit of a showcase is Loch Lomond that I can think of. So,
Mhm.
well, and
Well,
Head Club, I guess. Yeah.
That's a lovely whiskey. Lots of nice layers to
Mhm.
it. It's a good example of when a grain is good, it can be just gorgeous. Because it's, yeah, it's everything you want it to be. And not too bitter, not too oaky, not too toasty. I'm pretty sure we've talked about this before, but grain obviously being the other half of the equation from malts in a blend, often refined to the purity of, frankly, almost vodka. So,
Mhm.
I used to call this the accidentally good whiskey, which is perhaps a little bit uncharitable or fair, but it was never made to taste good. It was just made to not taste like anything or not taste strongly, so that they
Yep.
could use it in blends as kind of a body slash filler. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's kind of a carrier. It's meant to just carry the
yeah,
notes of everything else.
you layer the malts on top of, and some of the better blenders like Compass Box will use grains like this to add a bit of delicacy or to kind of add a silky soft tone. But the bulk of the industry has always just used this as it's the base on which you build the rest of the flavors.
Yeah, it's they'd use water if water had alcohol in
Mhm.
it, essentially.
Yeah. But damn,
Water
that's
actually, speaking of, actually does fairly well in that. It gets a really nice bit of pink grapefruit note on it.
that's so sweet with water in there now, like dulce de
Hmm.
leche, um, like vanilla bean ice cream. It's really quite rich and lush. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I'm digging that. Well, should we see what's behind door number 22?
Yeah, let's. So while you're doing that, a little bit more background in Invergordon. Um, it's nowhere near the biggest grain distillery in Scotland. That'd be Cameron Bridge, which is the biggest grain distillery in the UK and was in Europe when the UK was part of Europe. But they still do about 1.5 times amount the production per year of the largest single malt distilleries in Scotland, which are Glenfiddich and Glenlivet.
All right. Japanese whiskey, batch 5, 21-year-old from that boutique whiskey company.
Yeah.
Evan, were you actually able to find anything on this?
No.
We really should
There's
have reached out to Dave. We
yeah.
should have reached out to Dave. I'm sure he would have romanced
Yeah,
us
I'm
all.
not sure what they have on this. It's interesting because I've got a column that's nearly overdue on Japanese whiskey for a magazine, and it I wonder if this falls into the realm of what I wanted to talk about with Japanese whiskey, where is it all Japanese production or is it a world whiskey or what is it truly?
Cellared in Japan, to borrow from Canadian wine.
Yep,
Don't ever buy wine that says cellared in Canada. Basically, they're telling you they got the juice from Chile, and
yep,
they're putting it in oak barrels with, well, probably not even an oak cast. They're probably putting it in a vat with oak chips to get it
yep.
character. Um, I don't know what this is.
It is a blend. They
It is
do
a
tell you
blend.
that.
And to be fair, like blends are archetypal Japanese whiskeys. I mean, that is
Hmm.
the style. It wasn't really until the 80s that they even bothered with single malts at all. Um, but yeah, it's the fifth batch from these guys. Uh, bottled before they changed the rules on Japanese whiskey. So what
Which
it's
actually
that's mustard.
those only come into effect fully in March on March 31st of this year, if I remember correctly, or March
Okay.
30th of 2024. Sorry. So those aren't fully in effect, and the trouble with those rules is you only have to agree with them if you agree to agree with them. Essentially, you don't have to
The
agree with them. Yeah,
guidelines. The
yeah,
guidelines. Well, yeah, there is some murkiness in Japanese whiskey. Uh, there's a lot of Japanese-ish whiskey out there. And I
hmm,
think if you're lucky, they've matured it in Japan for a portion of its life. But like, then you've got the stuff where they literally just get whiskey sent to Japan, blend it, and then bottle it. Or maybe it's even blended before it gets there, and they're literally just
yeah,
bottling it so they can call it Japanese whiskey.
yeah. Along with those regulations, there are some companies that are well known for putting out subpar whiskey that's just made to look Japanese with some kanji lettering to it. There have been a couple companies that make that kind of production come out and say they fully intend to adhere to the rules, and with their
Yeah.
new bottlings they will, which is kind of cool. But
Well, I
even
know
big companies like Nika, there's going to be some of the stuff that they produce that's in the rules and some about that doesn't qualify, essentially.
well, exactly but I mean, the Taketsuru that we're getting now is
Yep.
100% Japanese. They changed
Yep.
that several years ago. Nika has the two malt distilleries, Yoichi and Miyagikyo, but they also
Mhm.
own Ben Nevis in Scotland. And famously, about 80% of Ben Nevis's production is sent to Japan before it's even put into oak. But I mean, the one that's interesting, I know we've got like a roughly 2-year-old whiskey from Shinobu in right now that they distilled,
Mhm.
matured themselves. And I guess if you're going to be foreign liquor brought in, like some of those Shinobu bottlings, I've had to admit are very good. It's
Yep.
just they weren't distilled in Japan. They were distilled in Scotland or Ireland or a mix of that plus Canada and the US, um, which is sort of, I don't know, misleading. But the darker end of that spectrum is definitely the guys who literally just bottle whatever they can get, bulk tankered over, put it in bottles, and then sell it again.
Yep. Yeah, regardless of what this is though, it's got some really nice grain notes in there on the nose. It does get into just a little bit of smokiness and earthiness that does at least somewhat remind me of Yoichi stylistically on the palate without being over the top.
Would Yoichi ever sell
Hmm.
a bulk 21-year-old blended spirit to boutique? I don't know. Maybe they would. Um, I'm fascinated to know what this is, and I think next time I have Dave Worthington on a chat, I'm gonna start it off by asking him about it. I mean, these
Hmm.
batches get good reviews. They're well
Yeah,
regarded whiskeys. Uh, Perhaps they're 100% Japanese, maybe they're not. But it's pretty, it's elegant.
it is. Yeah, and it's definitely of an age where you can't get Japanese whiskeys of now.
Mhm.
Um, there's not a whole lot available from the big companies. There's nothing available from the big companies now with the 21 on the label that I can think of. So
Yeah. Well, interesting nonetheless. And it does
mhm.
have kanji script on it. Did you share the link for that, or I can
No, I will though.
pull it up in on the page here. We
Yeah,
have
go
two
ahead.
batches of this. I think they're fairly similar with each other. This is the first one we've ever tried. Um, but we have two different batches of it, and they both have fairly comparable reviews. Like they both score in the high 80s. Um,
Mhm.
the prices are identical. Um, could be just bottled a slight bit apart. Now, Evan, would you add water to this one?
I don't think it needs it, but I'll try.
All right, I'm gonna science it, see what happens. Uh, I suppose it's worth noting at this point, Evan, and I'm sure you covered in your blog, but this year is the 100th anniversary of whiskey being made proper in Japan.
Yeah.
Yamazaki Distillery opened. We can't get it here in Canada, but you can buy it at Costco in the States.
Yeah. I wonder if they're going to change that once they have some 100th anniversary bottlings out, but we'll see.
Well, we do have the 100th anniversary Toki box, which
Hmm.
is a premium over the regular Toki for the exact same whiskey in a box, but not a different bottle.
That's I think we've got a 100th anniversary Hibiki coming too.
Mm, we had 6 bottles, one of which is going into a tasting. We're going to
Yep.
compare it against the regular Hibiki, but yeah, sadly those are gone. 6 bottles doesn't go very far when you have
Yep.
thousands and thousands of whiskey customers.
So what did water do for this one for you?
I don't think it did it any favors. I think it sort of diluted it too much, punched it around, shoved it around a little bit like a bully.
Yep.
Um,
Does give it a bit more of a like a flinty gunpowder note for me, just in the background there.
well, I'm ruling on this for myself, Evan. I'm saying no, no bueno.
Mhm.
All right, window 23, shall we?
Yes.
Some of you guys have probably already, I mean, I know it's Christmas. You've probably already gone through all of these at least once. Oh, our Bladnock cask.
Yeah. This
I didn't, re-
is such
I
a
didn't
fantastic
remember,
dram.
I didn't remember that we actually put this into the calendar. Um, So cool. This is a pleasant surprise. And how do you think it stacks up order wise here, Evan?
Uh, I probably should have put it second last, not in the
Really?
middle of the pie, in the middle of the lineup here. I think it still works, but
The nose
I
is
think it
quite
does overshadow what comes next a little bit, which in hindsight I should have been able to figure that out easily.
the nose is really soft, doughy, like fruit flan, lots of like orchard and stone fruits.
So I mentioned the Bowmore 18 reminded me of a dram in the Uber calendar that was unpeated, and that's this.
Because it's got lavender in it as well.
Oh yeah, this is like this reminds me of older Bowmore and Lafroig bottlings that I've had in a really cool manner without the peat.
Oh man, the palate on that's gorgeous. Floral, tropical. Layer on top of that, you got those orchard fruits as well, melons, citrus.
So yeah,
And it's yeah, it's so doughy and like it's like going into a French bakery, right? When they're pulling the croissants and the fruit flan out of the oven.
yeah, very. It's got a nice toastiness as well, and this great sort of cedar spice note that I get on the nose that I love on these older drams.
Mhm. Yeah. So
Blueberry yogurt for me.
this is one of the more expensive casks we've ever bottled. It didn't hurt that I think there was only 54 bottles of it. So begs the question, why were there only 54 bottles left in this cask? It could have been that it was a leaky cask, but then if that's the case, why is the ABV still in like the mid 50s? Could be that maybe there was a warehouseman that really liked this cask and kept going back for a drammer or mini.
Mhm.
Walking the dog, as they call it in the parlance. Fact is, we don't know, but you can file this under. I said we would never bottle this for the store before I tried it, and then afterwards tried to backpedal and figure out a way to justify why we should buy it. But
Well, and it's such a idiosyncratic dram for even for Gordon MacPhail. Like
mhm.
the sherry's there, but it doesn't show like any other G&M sherry cask that I can think of.
Oh,
And it is refill, but it's just not what I would expect of a Bladnock, even of this age. It just
no.
I love that combination of fruit and floral. It just works so well on this.
It's so waxy, and you've got that nice lavender note in there too, which is that tie to the Bowmore you were mentioning before. Yeah, this is gorgeous. This is a nice whiskey. I could just pour myself a double of this, grab my book, and
Mhm.
fall asleep in an armchair.
Yep.
Kind of whiskey. Bladnock, it's worth mentioning, was for the longest time the third lowland distillery. So for the longest time, you had Auchentoshan and Glengarry, but
Yep.
after Rosebank closed, after Little Mill closed, it was just down to the three. And Bladnock kind of limped along. It was bought by, I would say it's fair to say, an eccentric Irishman by the name of Raymond Armstrong,
Armstrong. Yep.
um, who for some reason had this idea of turning it into like a tourist destination caravan park. It never really worked out. He bought the distillery initially without the rights to distill, which he eventually negotiated from Diageo the rights to produce 100,000 liters a year. But he went bankrupt after a decade or more of like intermittent production. The new owners of the distillery have taken it to another level, but I've also heard they're now like tight for cash because I think they put a ton of money into it. Um,
Hmm.
you know, possibly we're building. I think it's a yogurt tycoon that built it in.
Yeah. Australian yogurt tycoon.
Mhm. And they did get into some hot water with their branding on the what's that the Pure Scott blend that didn't go down outside of Australia very well. But the interesting side note to this whiskey is Raymond Armstrong's son has proven to be a far better businessman than his father. He's also known as whiskey broker, and he started a
Hmm.
whiskey cask brokerage business. He took his student loan, bought casks with it, flipped them, and has been doing that now for almost 20 years. And at the same time, sometime around 15 years ago, he needed a place to store the casks, and he bought an old iron smelting facility and has been storing casks in it. And he's constantly building on it and building on it. And he's now got a
Crazy.
facility storing probably close to 50 or 75,000 casks. Like, it's incredibly impressive. He owns, I think, about 6,000 of them.
Hmm.
Completely self-made, which is not something, you hear about. Like, his dad didn't give him the money. He took his student loan, realized he didn't need all of it for school, put the rest of it into casks, and the rest is history.
Crazy.
Mhm.
Going through the history of this one, I think it's like it's a bad way to say it, but it's a good way, or it's a good thing to think about with Scotch whiskey distilleries, is never let the Irish own one. Because the previous Irish owners before the Armstrongs purchased it and this essentially liquidated the distillery, where they sold off the stills to Sweden uh, and sold off all the maturing casks. This is back in the 1930s, if I remember correctly. And then
That
it
was the
did come
parent
back
company
and
of
was,
Dunville. Wasn't that Dunville?
yeah, it was Dunville's. Yeah,
Yeah.
actually,
Interesting.
no, Dunville's did operate it for a bit,
Okay.
and then they were floundering but still solvent. But the shareholders of the company decided to dissolve everything and take what money they could from it. And then the Irish company that came in to purchase it liquidated the distillery after that.
Take your money and run, as they
Yep.
say. All right, Glen Keith, a sometimes
Hmm.
closed distillery that has reopened, uh, bottled by Whiskey Sponge. This is the 1993 edition, number 62. 28 years old, 51.9%, I think, unless
So
my
yeah,
eye.
in hindsight, this one should have come before the Bladnoch, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, no one bats 100%, Evan.
Yep. Still works, but just
Yeah.
isn't quite as big. But this is, I think quietly, this is one of Andrew's favorite distilleries for getting older casks. So,
Older refill casks of Glen Keith. You can get
mhm.
these nice, soft, decadent tones. They're often very fruity. Um, I actually, thanks to the generosity of an Irish fellow, actually, who was working in Calgary for a number of years and is now running Milroy's of Soho, and the recent beneficiary of a Glen Keith, I'm pretty sure, from their bar. I'm trying to spot the bottle, but I have no idea where I put
Cool.
it. Too many things. Yeah, it's a Milroy's bottling that just found its way home to me not too long ago. So
Glen Keith isn't a you don't see a lot of, well, there's been very few official ballings of it since it started in the 1959 or 1960. The distillery does have one of the cool Canadian connections for whiskey, where it was one of the guys behind it was the guy that owned, or was the head of, what was it, Chivas Brothers at the time, I think it was
hmm,
Samuel Bronfman, sorry, Seagram Distillers at the time. And he had a company that merged or took or partnered with and became Seagram Distillers. And Glen Keith was put together essentially to be an operating distillery with which has a good amount of production to it, right next to Strathisla Distillery, which was owned by the same company at the time and is again owned by the same company now. But Strathisla Distillery has always been sort of sought after by blenders and independent bottlers alike, and to sort of up their production, instead of making a second distillery and calling it Strathisla B, they made Glen Keith Distillery in the late 50s, 1960s, and also had sort of a skunk works slash lab arm, as a lot of Seagram's facilities did at the time, that did experiments with different types of production techniques. Glen Keith, for a long time, sort of vacillated back and forth, where they do double distillation runs and triple distillation runs. They also did some peated distillation runs that were known as Craig Duff and Glen Isla, was it? I think it was Glen Isla,
right.
for a little bit as well.
We have Craig Duff in the store, actually.
We do have a signatory 1973 Craig Duff right now.
Yeah, which will set you back a pretty penny. You don't see too much Craig Duff, and it is 45 years of age, but it's
Mhm.
also the same price it was 4 years ago. So that's something. Um, I was wrong. It's not a Glen Keith. It was a Milroy's 28-year-old Aberfeldy, or as one of our customers
Cool.
call it, an Aberdelphi,
Hmm.
which isn't the name of a distillery, but probably should be the name of a distillery.
Totally
Um,
should be.
yeah, I think Aberdelphi somehow just seems more authentic than Aberfeldy.
Hmm.
I digress.
So yeah, Glenkeith does have a really interesting history to it, for being one of those opened and then closed and then opened again distilleries. Has a bit going on because it was a bit of a skunk works as well. I don't know if it's used in the same lab fashion today as it was now that it's with Pernod Ricard, but it still does quietly run in the background.
Hmm, yeah. Well, and it was shuttered for a number of years,
Hmm.
which I think I remember back when there was an official bottling of 10-year-old.
And it was garbage.
Yeah, it was garbage. That was available, and it was in that weird sort of. It's actually like probably the Don Julio bottle. Don
Yeah,
Julio probably
pretty
just copied
close.
that bottle from them. Um, but yeah, it wasn't the best whiskey in the world. But when that disappeared about 12 years ago, I think most of us were thinking that Glenkeith was headed towards the rubbish bin of history for the Scotch whiskey industry. But Chivas has sold off so many of their distilleries that I guess they had to reopen some of the closed ones
Yeah.
just to maintain some degree of their production.
Well, and I think this is one of the few where they purchased it and then revamped it, essentially, to their credit, which I don't like crediting them too much, but in this case. And the other interesting thing about Glenkeith Distillery, it's used in one of the largest blends that we never see in Canada, which is 100 Pipers, which is massive in India, where it's bottled.
Yeah.
Even though it's a Scotch whiskey, blended Scotch whiskey, they can still bottle it there. So they just ship it over in tankers and then put it in Tetra Paks and glass there,
I
and big in Thailand and then parts of South America as well.
hopefully the Houthis don't fire rockets at that tanker, because like
Yeah.
that would be sad. I mean, it's sort of sad to lose the oil, but like if you lost a tanker of 100 pipers, I'm sure there'll be a lot of really sad Indians as a result. So
Mhm.
don't need to do that.
So does this have what you tend to look for Glenkeith?
Yeah, I think so. It's a little bit richer than most of the
Yeah.
ones I'm familiar with. It reminds me a lot of like bakery tarts and cookies. Like it's got a really caramelized note to it,
Yeah.
like nuts. There's some nice nutty tones in there,
Yeah.
but
Still
yeah.
some big, like going into like honeydew melon and cantaloupe for me in a cool manner too.
But yeah, it's interesting, that connection to Strathisla, because I think you can see some parallels with the spirit, except
Mhm.
that Strathisla we're all familiar with is the Gordon MacPhail Strathisla that's matured in good sherry.
Yeah.
It's definitely not that style.
Yeah. Agreed.
Got a nice weight though.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
do like this one, and I do think it probably could have came before the Bladnoch, but it doesn't just get drowned by it. So
I actually think the order works. Like the
cool.
spice and the toastiness on the back end is quite bold. Um,
Mhm.
so Christmas Day Dram, 76.151 from the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Clove studded in honey glazed ham, 30-year-old single malt whiskey. Evan, tell us about this bad boy.
Yeah, so distillery number 76 from Scotch Malt Whisky Society is Mortlock Distillery. So this is Mortlock that should be in very Mortlock fashion based on the name of clove studied and honey glazed ham. Pardon me, this was a cask finish. Here, I'll share my screen here so you guys can see it. So ex-bourbon hogshead for initial cask, finished in a first fill Oloroso hogshead. I don't have the date on it. Does 26 years in ex-bourbon, and then it must have been quite an active first fill Spanish Oloroso oak hogshead for the remainder of its maturation. The cask finish on this one is fantastic, in my opinion. The nose on it is absolutely gorgeous for me. It's kind of what you would expect from a sherry Mortlock of this age, just based on the name.
Frederica saying the last Glen Keith reminded her of something from the Victoria Whiskey Festival after party. I was going to say, I don't think there was any Glen Keiths poured during the main show, but
No.
after party is possible.
Yeah.
Um,
What wasn't at the after party?
what's that?
What wasn't at the after party?
My sobriety. That
Yeah,
was
that's right. Frederic, I talked about it, but my biggest takeaway from the after party was the Dutch licorice that you and Tom Bandridge shared with me. So thank you again for that.
Yeah, Dutch.
And Andrew wearing those funky sunglasses as well.
Yeah, and then being so hungover during the distillers dinner the next night, I was shaking. So I was like still coming down from the night before. Too much fun was had last year, I say. Too much.
Yep.
All right, Evan, speed round. Uh,
Well, what do you think of this Mortlock first?
oh, yeah, it's great. It's lovely. And sorry if I'm rushing it a bit.
Mhm.
My back is not happy with me with all the sitting today. So
All good.
um,
Yeah, fantastic Mortlock when it comes down to it. Great sherry. It does still have the ex-bourbon there, but it has the meatiness as you would expect from a Mortlock and the sherry.
it's
Pretty complex dram when it comes down to it.
this is I think quite a compliment. It's very
Mm,
reminiscent of like some Gordon MacPhail, like
totally.
sherry cast strength bottlings. A bit more creaminess in it. And the fruits are, I think, the sherry's a bit dumpier, but man, for a 30-year-old, that's smooth, elegant, and a lovely, lovely dram.
Mhm. Okay, now lightning round. Back to the Invergordon.
Yeah, let's do
This
it.
has a nice bit of like coal smoke almost right now, like charcoal briquettes even on the nose right now for me. It's going
Maybe
smoky.
if you're like using like a hot stone to cook something with agave nectar.
Yeah, good call.
Oh man, it's for how old it is, it's almost juicy,
Yeah, tons
silky.
of confectionery notes.
Yeah, it's almost as if like you walked into a bakery right at the moment they dropped a big bag of powdered sugar and it just went
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah. The probably possibly Japanese whiskey.
Hopefully Japanese.
Hmm.
I mean, compared to the rest of the range, the nose is a little weak.
Yeah,
Um,
still getting a bit of that flinty note. Touch of lighter fluid in there too.
on the nose, I was getting like budget motel waffles and syrup. Like you know the ones where you put the waffle batter yourself into the waffle maker and
Yeah.
like I experienced that last winter at my nephew's hockey tournament when I had to take him to Sylvan Lake. The palate's a bit disjointed though, like it's a bit nuttier, a bit richer, more caramel. I can see that grain filament in there, and it's good. It's pretty, but it's not anything to write home to mom about.
Hmm. Back to the Bladnock.
Mm. Oh, and that blend, that last sip was almost like sour, bitter sherry.
Hmm.
The Bladnock, oh man,
Yeah, this actually didn't make my top five, which I'm kind of shaking my head at myself at now.
it's like there's like a burst of lemon meringue in there. It's really tropical, like some sort of like
Yeah.
uh fruit compote where you've really sort of boiled it down to get rid of as much of the water as possible. And remember that waxy thing on lined paper? You know the
Yeah.
little wax strip at the top? It reminds me of that too
Hmm.
on the nose.
Still blueberry yogurt all over the place on this one for me too.
Oh man, the palate on that is
Killer.
silky, waxy, fruity. Some nice spices creeping in there too, toasty and floral. That's a gorgeous bottling.
Hmm.
Okay.
Glen
Keith.
Keith.
On the nose, I think you're right. The position, it suffers a little bit, but it works on the
How
palate.
it works. Yeah.
Lots of cookies. Even if some of like Auntie Beth's like whiskey chocolate chip cookies.
Yeah.
Um, there's some cool notes in there, but man, it is still overshadowed by that Bladnock. That Bladnock is
Yeah.
just
A little bit of passion fruit juice on the palate right now for me on that Glenkeith too.
all right. And the
Back
Mortlock.
to the cloves. This nose is just really, really good. Like it goes into the meatiness, but it's got that cloves and ham note. It's got these underlying tropical notes again, orchard fruits as well, a little bit of like burnt brown sugar on apple crumble.
Polished Italian leather shoes.
Yep.
Some nice baker's chocolate in there as well.
It's like you're actually crushing grapes in a barrel with those polished Italian leather shoes.
I hope you're making port.
That's right.
Palate, it's sweet, fruity, spicy. There's sherry notes in there, the vanilla. There's also a bit of a tropical tone, and then it is getting a bit meaty. That honey glazed ham's definitely showing up on the finish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the cloves. Fantastic dram. Like that was a really good call on the cask finish there.
Very well done. Damn. Well, I mean, I think I can pretty confidently pick my favorites from tonight's lineup.
Yeah, you go, man.
It has to be Bladnock, then the Society Mortlook, and then the Malt Barn Invergordon.
Cool.
You know, the Whiskey Sponge was good, but it wasn't great. I think that Invergordon really edges it out.
Cool. I had the same person second. I would pick the Glenkeith. Not a distillery I have as much experience as you do with, but I really like the weightiness that I've had versus other Glenkeiths on that.
Yeah, cool.
Well,
Now Evan,
I did have a poll, but there's probably no reason to do that on here. But I hope you guys enjoyed the 25 days on the Uber calendar. It was both calendars for me were tons of fun. The Uber calendar, my top five personally were the first dram, the SMWS Quiet Confidence, the Lecheg, or Tobermory that we had on day one, just because it showed very different. The Glenfarclas 1990 family cask was fantastic. Portiskeag 28, which again the Bladnock reminds me of a little bit with those floral notes. The Boutique Millstone, which I think Andrew might disagree with me on that one, and the Glenfarclas, but I love that Millstone. And then my number one would be the Whiskey Trail Carsbridge, which was just completely out of left field for a grain for me.
yeah, I mean, I think the not being able to remember all of them with the same clarity you have here, Evan, but I mean, the Bladnock from tonight's tasting, for
Yeah.
me stands out. That 1990 Gordon MacPhail was killer. The Port Asking 28, I agree with you. It really showed very well in like a tough lineup. And I do really like that Millstone 25. I think it was just a bit too much for me. Like it's just over the
Yep.
top. But the Carza Bridge was a great bottling too. So
Yeah.
I don't know. And I mean, I'd be hard pressed not to put this Mortlock from, day 25 on my list.
Yeah.
Now,
In hindsight, I probably would put that in the Bladnock in there.
yeah. Now we have a couple of guests here, so we might as well ask them what their favorites were while they're here. But Evan, I may bow out, just
Yeah.
not feeling 100% tonight. I do want to thank you guys for taking part for doing these tastings. Evan and I really enjoy doing them. Doing two a night was interesting. So we may have to rethink or revisit that next year. Maybe we'll have to tackle this thing in teams, but we'll figure that out. But yeah, Frederica, Nick, everybody else who bought one. I know Jeff and Nicholas were on a lot of these tastings as well. Thanks for doing them. I'm going to leave you in Evan's capable hands to wrap, but have a great night. Happy New Year. Happy 2024. And yeah, I'll see you in Victoria, Frederica. Okay.
Yeah.